Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Bryan, and I'm happy to get us kicked off today. We're going to pass back and forth the baton here, and we will be diving into subject matter you're never going to get a full answer on. So I just want to put that out for you there. Like, let's just do a little management of expectations from the beginning. But what we're hopeful for is that we're going to poke and prod and actually give you some actionable things, even in this hyper iterative process of trying to understand human beings, really complex systems, history, and where and how we can move forward. So, with that, you understand why we can't give all of that to you in 55 minutes. So, with that, though, we're going to jump in. Today's idea is about centering humans and centering humanity. And a lot of that does mean we have to take a position of humility first, because most of us, if we have not gone to some kind of advanced education to really study humans, we actually get a really poor organization of that concept of human and humanity handed to us in most versions of education, K to 12. And then even in a lot of post-secondary spaces. So that kind of humility is really about honoring the fact that I know my experience the best and just mine. And I even have help from a therapist and executive coach to help me really get into digging through the fullness of my own experience. So then trying to step into a space of being a knower and then an understander of somebody else's experience is a very, very Herculean task that we kind of just slip in and out of every day as if it's pretty simple, because we have empathy and it gets really complicated. So the goal here is to really be thinking about, what does it mean to be trauma aware? What do you need to be aware of? And then what does it mean to be people centered? What does it mean to have people as the North Star? People internal to the org, people external to the org, beneficiaries, what does it mean to have people, and by default humanity, centered in the context of our work with social impact or impact investing? Sorry. Oh no. I use a Mac. There we go. I love that technology is semi-intuitive. You can kind of figure it out. So anyway, I'm the founder and CEO of Human Nature. Our mission is to put humanity at the heart of every organization. We are a talent organizational development firm. A lot of learning packages, coaching packages, facilitation packages for boards, senior leaders, frontline staff, et cetera. We do some assessment work, but our big thing is combining the science of human development with the science of complexity and systems and design. So it's like, how do we make sense of all of it? And then what's the most actionable thing we can do for the iterative spot that we're in right now? Hold that, do some learning, and then move to the next spot, right? I'm going to pass it to my colleague.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everyone. How are you all feeling in this moment? Impatient, yeah. You want to get to the good stuff, right? Do you want to get to the neuroscience? Yeah. Yeah, we would have a nice dinner together talking about neuroscience, the three of us. What else? What are you feeling? The topic is, like, the title of the session probably is bringing up some stuff. Are you noticing it? Are you feeling speechless? Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm Chantel Chapman. My pronouns are she, her, and I am coming from the stolen traditional territory of the Musqueam, Kwantlen, and Swassons people as a settler of European descent, and this is known as Richmond. It's in what's known as Canada. I'm the founder and CEO of Trauma of Money. Do you want to go to the next slide? Oh, before we do that, I have to remind us, in this session, there's an ongoing invitation for you to advocate for your needs in this session. So the work that we do in Trauma of Money is a psychoeducation program. We're not a replacement for mental health care or medical care. So if you feel activated to the point that it feels out of your control, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I know our host said put away your phones, but if you need to scroll TikTok in this session, because that's what your nervous system needs, do it. It's okay. You are in charge of what you need. If you need to step outside, if you want to eat, drink, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself in this session.
I can just pass this.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I thought we removed those. Oh, no.
This is an older deck. So we're going to model something in real time. I realized it when it said trauma money intro. I was like, oh, this is an older deck.
Oh,
So we have some
okay.
things in here that are not here. We're going to talk to you about them when we get to those moments, but you'll get the information.
You were talking about humility, and
We're
yeah.
practicing already.
All right. Non-closure, Mike, you already mentioned that. This is a massive topic. We teach about this topic in 18 weeks, 60 hours, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface on that time. So in 55 minutes, we're not going to be able to go too much into it. But trauma of money, for those of you that don't know, we are a professional development education platform, and we teach professionals and corporations how to integrate a trauma-aware approach into money. And we work with lots of different professionals. We train a lot of financial therapists, trauma therapists. We work with folks in economic justice. We work with finance professionals, and it's so nice to see some of our alumni here. I'll pass it back to you.
Nice. So jumping in, my friend, I have a question for you. It's this idea of what makes us human. And I'm just curious. We'll just give a minute of space for anyone to answer this question. What does that mean to you? What makes us human? Yeah, that's very Homo sapien. That's right. Could everyone hear the comment? The fact that we raise our young, our rearing stages are very long compared to most other mammalian species, let alone other living species on the planet. And we're also just piggybacking on that. We're kind of undercooked when we're born. If you think about a lot of other mammals, they're mobile within the first 12 to 24 hours. We are pretty helpless, right? Which has a ton of biological drivers for us in a number of other areas of our human development, which we'll talk about a little later. Can I get one more comment in this area? Yeah. Oh, I heard emotions. Yes, and we're going to talk about that too.
Yes.
Right, whales, right, yeah. Nice. Emotions, huge. Yes, one more, there we go. Perspective, love that. Right. We're just going to move to the next slide because perspective is what this next exercise is all about. So I want to submit to you that the answer to that question, again, what makes us human, is typically stuck behind walls, paywalls in colleges and spaces of higher education. We actually do a really poor job of educating children about their own brain and body. There's some interventions that are coming online now to teach children about stress, the good side of it and the bad side of it. Or there's a lot of social emotional learning work where you're learning how to appraise the situation because of what we understand. And appraise means assess. And then what story or narrative are you putting around the moment or situation you're in, because you're interacting with the content of that narrative in a regular, on a regular basis, and it's involved with the physiology, if you will, of how you're problem solving. It's not thinking is physiological as much as it's emotional, right? So all that being said, what I want to take you on, though, is a quick journey to help ground us in a bunch of science we're going to whip through really fast for the sake of time. So go with me. This is going to feel very facetious. In fact, the ironic thing is somebody in the room has done this before with me. But we're going to grow a fictitious crop together to get you in the mindset of being a designer and get you into the mindset of what that means in the context of well-being. I want to use a very asinine example of growing a tomato crop. So we are all going to collectively grow the largest tomato crop we possibly can. What do we need to be able to grow the healthiest, largest tomato crop that we can? Just spit things out at me. Seeds, soil, water, sun. I can line all those things up and I'm definitely not getting a crop. What else do I need? Time, love it. What else? Coordination, I need people. We need knowledge, so I need labor, right? Like, all of a sudden now we've quickly just named things that are tangible, intangible, things that are human-made and things that are naturally occurring. In the context of the development of this healthy crop, our goal is a healthy crop, these 4 dimensions of things or 4 dimensions of variables are going to collide with one another in a kind of rhythm of a dance that I like to call development. So we get to the point, we've done all the things, yada, yada, we've made it. We're here, and you're coming back after leaving a crew, me and Chantel and a crew, and charge. And as you're driving up to see this bountiful, red, plump, ripe batch of tomatoes everywhere, you start to see these crimson kind of shriveled up looking beet things. And I'm just curious, what's the first thing crossing your mind right now? Anything? Not enough water. Oh no, that's a good one. Anything else? What's crossing the mind in the moment of the exercise? What went wrong in the system? Death. All right, great. So what could we do to try to figure out or ascertain what happened? We could look at weather reports for the last 2-3 months. What else could we do? You were about to say something, right? Nope. Okay. Right? We could do a process review, right? Essentially. We could test soil. I'm just going to name some things for the sake of time. We could test soil. We could interview other farmers or growers in the region, see what they're experiencing. We could, someone once said we could install surveillance equipment. I was like, yes, we could. Spy on us now. You could. Right. Last question for you. How many of you would blame the tomato for its resulting state of being? Right. The premise is kind of foolish. But there's this fascinating thing that happens when you switch a tomato out for a human being. The curiosity and the multiplicities of ways in which we try to understand why the goal was not met, why my expectations were not met. Whew, lenses pop up very fast. Did they try hard enough? Did they want it hard enough? Public education is free. I mean, we just start going down a litany of things before we actually take the step of just practicing curiosity about what might have happened and why that might not match up with my expectation management in the moment. And if it's this complex, pointing out to things that are tangible, intangible, human-made, and naturally occurring, colliding for a tomato, how much more complex is it for a human being? That's me at 3. That tomato to this tomato, there's a lot of stuff that has transpired. There's a lot that's, I keep pressing this, but I'm so, there we go. It's a lot that's transpired.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's me with the 2 women that raised me for the first 5 years of my life. And I love to show this photo because it looks like they're going to the club, but they're like, let's stop and get a Sears family photo shoot first. Right? And, you know, I always talk about when I started my career in finance. And if you looked at my LinkedIn, it's probably 17 years ago. But I look back at this picture, and that's where it started, or maybe even before that. I started Trauma of Money, being a survivor of sexual abuse and incest and poverty and growing up in a home with addiction. And I started it because I was noticing all these behaviors that I had as an entrepreneur, such as under-earning, people-pleasing, not able to negotiate. And when I was seeking support, I was told I should try to budget, get financial literacy, and try willpower. And all of these experiences were not validated when I was trying to seek help. And this is what we want to get into a little more today, is looking outside of us at the environment for what's happening to give us some insight and help us decrease shame and increase discernment around our relationship with money, our relationship with capital, our relationship with entrepreneurship and work.
Beautifully stated. And so moving into some frameworks, right? We are actively trying to make sense of what happens between 3-year-old tomato to 40-year-old tomato, right? And what role does policy play? What role does capital play? Whether it's public capital, private capital, whatever, we're trying to make sense of a lot of things, particularly in the social impact space. And the thing I try to submit to everybody is when you take a framework like the social determinants of health, there's some interesting things that you can do if you practice humility and curiosity. And one of the first questions I always try to get everybody to settle in is when you're talking about families and individuals, show me the aspect of this entire matrix that isn't undergirded by somebody's income or wealth. So in Pennsylvania, where I live, in Philadelphia, we're still stuck at $7.25 an hour across the state. And Philadelphia has no power to change minimum wage because of legislation that shifted in 2009. What are we supposed to do for families who work 60-hour weeks at $8 an hour, or even 12, because it sounds benevolent when minimum wage is $7.25? But effectively, you need a $65,000 a year salary as a single person in Philadelphia to survive. We do not do a good job of leaning on what we know about lived needs, experiences as it relates to money and the science of human development. There's a big gap there. And so, geez, Michael, get a PC. All right, here we go. Couple of other science-based things we want to sit in that have their bearings on systems. So all systems, this comes from dealing with physiological ecosystems. Three main tenets. They're communities of living things and non-living things interacting, that all things within the ecosystem are linked together by nutrient cycles and energy flows, and that there's a transference of material between organisms and their environments. And this is where, for the human context, we actually have to go back to the science of emotional experience. And I say emotional experience specifically because, leaning on perspective, a situation can happen to a person and they're going to appraise it. A situation can happen in this room right now, actually. And we are not all going to appraise it the same way. And so the emotional responses that are elicited in the room have biological, psychological, social, and spiritual correlates. This is called the health sciences model of human development. Spiritual, I'm going to start there because that word is scary for us because it typically connotates religion. But that is not what the health scientists were thinking when they did this. It was the last term added, biopsychosocial. In fact, if you go back to the 70s, you start seeing the proliferation of biopsychological frames and studies and textbooks. And you get into like the 2010s, we start adding in social because humans are social organisms. Our biology and our social nature are forever intertwined. Epigenetics, I mean, we're studying so many, the function of the immune system. I'm just throwing quick things at you to hopefully go read and look them up. And in fact, National Geographic has a Science of Stress edition that came out in June. It's fantastic. Anyhow, what we understand and why we added in spiritual is that humans are driven to make meaning whether they want to or not. It is actually a physiological drive because you have to make sense of the complexity of the amount of time that is spent in development with people and then responding to complex systems you often are not at the helm of designing. You're just experiencing them. You're inheriting them. Meaning making, when there's no meaning presented to you, your brain is actually physiologically driven to make it up. Pull from what it understands to fill in the blank. That is what we call bias. Social cognitive bias, to kind of save the bias literature from things that are happening. That doesn't mean bias isn't real. I want to be clear here. But bias goes beyond gender and race. When's the last time you said, oh my God, recency bias is messing up how I'm thinking about my giving? You haven't, because we don't talk about social cognitive bias with enough integrity beyond talking points and really hot button moments. So I just want to submit that to you. Believe in bias, but we got to clear that space up. You are subsumed in this. These dynamic dimensions influence one another, and they happen at the same time. So there is no, I don't want to impact Chantel's psychological being today, actually, when I engage her. I am choosing not to. That's not, you don't have that choice. But we sometimes operate as if we do. If you think about the way education works, if you think about the way lending can work, there's all kinds of things to consider. The other thing, science-based to consider, this is called social ecological theory. In the public health space, if you're in the systems, we call it nested systems theory, but you get this from the lived experience, going back to the tomato. We are in systems. The human body is a complex series of systems that in itself is in another nested system, which is a family or a home, and that's in a neighborhood or a community. And now communities are also digital, so you can connect with people all over the place. And you're just further embedded in more social complexity. And people and families experience all systems at the same time. We study them in isolation. It's the fallacy of, unfortunately, the way academia presents this kind of research and structures it. It's helpful to an extent. The slice of life research is not how life works. So if we're not conscious, we make really bad decisions, well-intended. And this is where we get into definitions around trauma and how trauma begins to operationalize itself. So my favorite definition, I have two. This is one of them from the American Psychiatric Association. Trauma involves a perceived or literal threat to one's physical or emotional well-being and brings out, it elicits intense feelings of helplessness, terror, and a lack of control. If you start relationships in humility and become a great active listener, as people begin to trust you more, because trust is currency, social capital is real, as people begin to trust you more and divulge stories, as they begin to talk about the larger narratives that shape their understanding of the world, active listening will help you identify if they are speaking to things that point at helplessness in their experience, point at terror or a lack of control. Another term for a lack of control is powerlessness. Another way to frame that is, well, where are my decisions structurally out of my hands? Do I want to die by death of 1,000,000 paper cuts or by drinking arsenic? I want to live. Do you want to die by death of 1,000,000 paper cuts or arsenic? There actually is no choice for life in a lot of situations, or the life-giving choice is not the one made available to me. To be really specific, think about food and food access. We had to get to language like food apartheid to better describe the system's complexity of what is or isn't available to someone on a regular day of decision-making, of getting nutrients for their families. The other thing to consider is that stress, and please pick up that National Geographic piece, stress is a killer. It's also an Achilles heel for us because it's also how we learn. It's like the seed of learning. This is a very complex situation and conversation. What we know and understand about the science of stress is that regardless of income levels, there are a number of stressors that you can experience where money might make it easier to get through, but it's not solving the problem. Parenting alone is one of those. Because what does a kid want? Your time. You can be as rich as you want. They want your time, and the nanny is giving the time, the au pair is giving the time. Where's the attachment being built with the au pair, the nanny? How does that make the parent feel when the au pair is not there? Kid falls, cries, and is screaming for the au pair to comfort them. And when you try, they're like, don't touch me. And they're 3, and that's a normal response for a 3-year-old. Complicated situation for a human being to work through, regardless of how rich you are or how wealthy you are. That's just one type of chronic stress. There's a couple here: intergenerational caregiving, living with a chronic illness, caregiving for a loved one with a chronic illness, parenting alone, living with a disability, caring for a loved one. These are real things that are happening in real time, compounded, and we have these magic thresholds at work where we say, divorce yourself from all of that and just be here, focus on the problems at hand, focus on the work, focus on your team. All that being said, what we understand about the science, oh boy, I hit the button there. What we understand about the science of stress and trauma is that literally, going back to the health sciences model of human development, trauma and chronic stress unmitigated disrupt development across all 4 of those dimensions. Every traumatic event is inherently stressful. Every stressful event is not inherently traumatic. The problem, though, is that the body, physiologically, there's a base response, which we talk about through something called your HPA axis. It is responding, and Chantel's going to go into more detail here, but it's responding to all of those things, to the trauma and to the chronic stressor. That overactivation of the body's stress mechanism, look up something called allostatic load. It's the wear and tear on the body from the overactivation and usage of your body's stress response mechanism, or the HPA axis. It will literally erode brain architecture. It will erode gut lining, impact your immunofunction. There's so much that happens when your body is routinely stressed. And we don't think about because of perspective, what operationalizes stressors and traumas in the large groups that we are aiming to impact with social impact investing. Do we know enough to know what our dollars are actually doing? So we do have a question for you. How do you consider the social determinants? Actually, we edited this question. Let me give you the edited question. Do you consider the social determinants of health in your work, in your organization, or in your giving? If so, how? And if not, well, how might you? What does it make you think about considering, or even just like a next iterative question along a journey? The floor is open if anyone wants to share anything, or even just like a thought. Yeah.
I'm a receiver, not a giver in this context. But one thing I bring forward is it takes a lot longer to get to outcomes. It because the amount of time to build the currency of trust necessary to do this level of healing work is not accounted for and is the most important part of the formula.
Period. You are in our slides. So you are a giver in this space. So I appreciate that. Did everyone hear the comment about time? We talk about, in my line of work, we talk about time as an investment that people that lack a certain dimension of social power don't have a lot of. And that lack of social power exists across social infrastructure. Every nonprofit is not built the same. I start talking, in my line of work, we talk about corporate nonprofits, because when your nonprofit has a $3 billion endowment, we are not going to put you in the same category as the mom and pop nonprofits in Philly. You are a corporate nonprofit. We'll come up with other language for it, but let's be clear. We can't just loop everything together, right? So in that context, though, there is a lot of investment to be made with time, particularly from the institutions and places and systems that have it to give as an investment. It's just often not convenient for tax purposes. I should have shared this. So I'm on the board of 3 local philanthropic institutions in Philadelphia. I'm the vice chair of the Fells Fund, CMUS Fells Fund. I currently chair the investment committee. I'll be the board chair in January, which is kind of crazy. I am also on the board of a smaller foundation there called UBA, the Union Benevolence Association. And then I'm on the board of a philanthropic 501c3 chartered by the city called the Philadelphia Cultural Fund. So I've been on those boards roughly about 6 to 8 years between them. And I bring that, so some of my quick comments are coming from the practice of both private line equity items or private equity line items within our endowment that we are deploying and trying to figure out how to do this work with, and then the concessionary side, the grant making side, and the relationship building. I'm going to pass it to Chantel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. I'm going to just remind all of us that we have bodies here too, not just the brain. So if you're feeling maybe your breath is being held, just take a moment to connect into the breath if that's accessible to you, to feel your feet on the floor. I wanted to introduce our trauma of money map. And this goes into the lens that we use when understanding the relationship with money. And this can be the relationship with money that we have individually, the relationship that an organization has with money. And the reason why this feels like an important teaching, especially in our space, is I worked in the financial education space for many years, and there's a lot of gaslighting that goes on around what impacts our relationship with money. And even in the financial psychology space, which is a relatively new field, they talk a lot about financial trauma, and they describe financial trauma as a trauma that happens as a result of something to do specifically with money. So growing up in poverty, inability to retire, chronic financial stress, divorce, sudden loss of assets. And we actually found in the work that we do that the relationship with money goes deeper, and it's more linked to trauma than we're all really talking about. We believe that any trauma that anyone experiences or that has been experienced in their lineage has the ability to impact the relationship with money, even if the original trauma had nothing to do with money. And the reason is to simply say trauma is when something happens or doesn't happen that leaves us feeling unsafe and not worthy. What does money represent in our society? Worth and security. So if we have wounding around worth and security, it makes a lot of sense that trauma responses can arise when interacting with money on any level, with interacting with capitalism. And so these are the layers that we believe impact the relationship with money: generational trauma or scarcity, relational trauma or scarcity, societal trauma or scarcity, systemic trauma or scarcity, laws of nature. This is just another way of us inviting folks to maybe model their relationship with money after a framework that is not rooted in scarcity, like our economic system. And we like to pull from nature a lot. We like to look at biomimicry. And we actually found in our research that we have an inherent neuroexpectancy for reciprocity. So a fair exchange of energy. And when reciprocity is not present, we feel a threat to safety. And I think about that, and I think about the economic system that we live in and how much it lacks reciprocity. we often quote Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, because she really beautifully points out all the different ways that there are so many examples in nature of interacting with resources that are rooted in abundance and not scarcity. And then the last layer that we believe impacts the relationship with money, whether you are an entrepreneur seeking capital and trying to understand business finance, or you're an individual trying to understand how taxes work, is financial literacy. But financial literacy is always last, because we have found that if you are in a state of scarcity, or you believe that you're in scarcity, or you're in an activated state of trauma, you cannot engage with financial literacy. It actually causes more harm than it does good, because it taxes, it's a bandwidth tax on us. And that bandwidth tax doesn't allow us to engage with it. And then what happens? We feel shame. We feel personal responsibility. And that brings me to this framework that comes from Dr. Devin Price. And he has identified the 5 core values of systemic shame. And these are the exact same core values that we see financial shame. So the first one is individualism, isolation, and competition. This teaching of individualism is really deeply connected to shame, and really deeply connected to financial shame. How many times have you experienced something with your money and you really felt like you were the only one going through it? Yeah, raise your hand. So I'm not the only one. So I was at my accountant's office last week, and I had filed my taxes late this year, and I was feeling so much shame. Like, I can't believe this. I run Trauma Money and I'm doing this. I was really overwhelmed. I had a lot on my plate this year. And he goes, you know what? I have a client who's a CPA who hasn't filed since 2016. I was like, are you serious? He's like, I'm letting you in on a little secret. The accountants always file late. I was like, here I am thinking I'm going to jail because I didn't file it on time. So this shame and feeling alone is a product of systemic financial shame. The next one is consumerism. Our value is associated with what we can buy and own. And then perfectionism. Endless and flawless work is all that matters. And then wealth, power over through financial wealth, and then personal responsibility. Change only happens through personal willpower and strength. And we hear that a lot in the finance space. Like, if you only did this different, your situation would be better. And that's just absolutely not true. And I'm going to pass it back to you. Oh, our slides. Okay. Yeah. Great.
So this is one of those moments where I'm going to talk to a thing that's not fully present. And we're both sitting at the same time. This is fantastic.
I love this.
Feels like
this
a TV
feels
show.
better.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sit up so make sure everyone can see. So one of the things that we ended up talking about and making a slide on is a reflective moment to really consider, what does this imply on the opposite end of the relationship? So again, going back to the fact that humans are social organisms, relationships are the bedrock of everything that happens for us, literally. There is no human being without being in relationship to another human being. Like, your brain kind of works the same way. A neuron has to connect to other neurons to survive. If it doesn't, it literally withers and dies. So connectivity is built in us at multiple dimensions of our existence. And so in that context of thinking about relationships from the investor's perspective, again, the investment can be from the public side, it could be from the private side, it could be concessionary, it could be, you want some kind of return, whatever it is. From the investment side at large, how does individualism impact people who are actually seeking dollars? What does it mean when we say to people things like, well, we like to be the catalytic investor. So we're really thoughtful about like who we're coming next to. So as a person that also raises money, because I have a business and I also have a lab at Drexel, I do way too many things. So I have a research lab at Drexel University, and I had a foundation literally say to me, well, we would love to support this and we would love to support you, but we really need to be the catalytic thing here. And I was like, well, I have other funding because I have a team, And they were like, well, is someone dropping out soon? Like, how do we wedge in there and get like the story? I mean, literal con. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. What's the North Star here? People or your story? So what condition or environments are investors setting when people have to raise dollars for, going back to this slide on the social determinants of health, the executive is concerned often about the well-being of their staff. They have children. How often have we thought about our relationship to the stress in the household and how that impacts learning for children? We would love, again, slice of life research has us believing that that's the right analysis for social impact investment. And I challenge that back all the time and go, no. I'll just give you one other example that I think is really important here. And it's the one around consumerism. What made me a better fundraiser, honestly, was when I had a good conversation with my executive coach who said, yeah, I'm going to say something that's going to sound wild. Remove all your emotion around money. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said to me, Michael, it's a number. They either hit it or they don't, and you move to the next. And do not let them rob you of your power, because you will go in circles about my worth and my everything that Chantel is talking about. And he just stopped me in that moment and said, pull yourself back. This is nothing. What are you really worth? $10 million an hour. They'll never pay it, and it's fine. And use that as your basis. And it helped. I'll say this. The other thing that also helped me from that, I sat back and said, you know what? This is capitalism. You are buying outcomes from me. You are buying relationships from me. You are buying know-how from me. You are buying research skills from me. You are buying my in-depthness across Philly and other parts of this country from me, because I have trust as currency, and you need it. So you are giving money, but I'm giving you, my team and I, we're seeding and giving you something in return. The moment it became transactional to me, because I realized that I was being consumed, we were being consumed. Our humanity was being consumed, our relationships, our knowledge, the human capital is the way we talk about it through a workforce context, right? So for me, because of the pressure of the nature, the behavioral relationship around social impact is so consumer driven, I had to put myself in that mindset to protect myself. And again, it's made me a better fundraiser, but it also feels, I'll just name for me, it feels a little sometimes, because I have to make everything a balance sheet issue. And it's fine. Like, I get it. Like, it's about communication, because I need the thing, I want it to land. But there is something, that's why I'm not afraid of the health sciences model, adding spiritual and talking about the dimensions of meaning making and using the science behind it to push us to that level of complexity, because it starts to put something back in that's a little bit harder to enumerate, so that everything just isn't a cost benefit analysis or return on investment analysis for a human being. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So what we have found in our research is that when financial shame or systemic shame is present, it's very common for us to go into what we call the destructive financial shame cycle. And this usually starts out with a perfectionism narrative. I need to be like this. My company needs to be like this. And we can't reach that. So then we experience shame. We feel shame internally. We feel like others are going to shame us or shun us. And then what happens is that is disruptive to the nervous system. So we want to soothe that pain. And that's a very normal response. If you feel discomfort, if you feel disruption, you want to soothe the pain. And oftentimes what can happen here is we move into maybe procrastination in this process of soothing the pain. This is where we might reach out to a compulsive behavior potentially. We see a lot of folks who are overspending. This is usually when this arises, or something that we do compulsively to soothe the nervous system, but maybe there's negative consequences. And then we can move into avoidance, and we call this like a space of paralysis. So I love to introduce this, especially when I'm speaking to folks who are either entrepreneurs or they're investors or work with entrepreneurs, is you may have had an experience where, let's say you're working with an entrepreneur and you have paperwork for them to sign for them to receive a big check. You would think they want to sign this immediately, and they don't. And you are maybe saying, like, what's going on here? Are they unorganized? Do they not want this? And what could happen is they could be in this place of the cycle of shame. Because we've found in our work that trauma survivors feel shame when good things happen too. So getting the grant, getting the money, getting the award, that creates vulnerability and creates a sense of exposure. And that can create shame. You know, what if my community members are like, who do you think you are for that? And so this is why some of these behaviors of avoidance can arise through financial shame. So if these are the values of systemic shame, what values do you want to uplift? Feel free to yell them out. Reciprocity. Thanks, Tani. Cooperation. Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Non-transactional relationships. Anyone else? Belonging, yeah. Sorry? Abundance, yeah. Beautiful. Oh, thank you. Self-acceptance.
Really quickly, can you go back to, we had one other slide we added in here from the next one. There was another slide in here we added around, again, the investor side, and again, investor, large I investor of many types. And just to point out the three things in this cycle, often we start with the North Star as goodness. And I think it's actually more unspoken than named as like, I want to be good. I'm trying to be good. I'm trying to demonstrate goodness. I think it actually, if anyone's into communications theory, it's a really dope theory called multiple goals theory that I always suggest anyone in dealing with conflict management resolution teams. You're a manager. It's so worth looking at. There's another one, another frame called Crucial Conversations. That's in the book. Really fantastic. But they do hit at these ideas that in any given dynamic of a relationship between two people, everything we say, you know, the iceberg analogy, right? Like everything we say is not everything we mean. And you can often have multiple goals at play on one side versus the other, and then the mismatch of multiple goals between the two. And it makes communication very complex. And I think one of the things that we need to name is that because of a lot of what's transpired in our country since its inception, and in particular, as more information is readily at everyone's fingertips, there is this pursuit of goodness or reclamation of like, well, no, we meant well, and we are good people. And I think goodness often starts a lot of the impact conversation as a part of the multiple goals that are present. That then leads to this issue around intentionality as a metric. Intentionality matters, but is actually very inappropriate from a systems perspective as a metric. Could say more there, but moving to the next piece, which really just ends in misalignment of objectives, of North Stars, of what is really needed and important in people's lives as it relates to structuring the capital, deploying it, and thinking about then utilizing or like the uptake of it for the operations and activities that we want to carry out.
Yeah, so we have, how do you fix this?
No words. There we go.
So we only have 5 minutes left and we want to have some time for questions, but just to very quickly summarize, understanding trauma and how it can show up in all these spaces is very important, because in a trauma state, every response is an action in survival instead of cognitive choice. And something that we think is really important to identify is that we've also found that scarcity impacts the brain in a really similar way to trauma. So scarcity can reduce cognitive capacity, fluid intelligence, how we process information, decision-making, organization, and impulse control. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into all of this. But let's wrap up and have some questions, and if anything else you want to add.
Sure. The only thing I would add is to your point around why scarcity shows up like trauma. Scarcity involves helplessness. It involves a lack of control. It does involve terror, right? Like it involves elements of these things. And if you're not keen and you're not practicing active listening, you can miss that people are literally in relationship with you, divulging where they're at and how that might be impacting them cognitively. Look up cognitive overload if you're really interested in the concept of like the brain. You got one brain and it's doing a whole bunch of stuff throughout the entire day. We segment our days. Your brain doesn't actually work like that. So cognitive overload is a very real thing that is deeply studied. Going back to, again, allostatic load, please look these things up if you want to get contextuality around some of the nuance we're talking about and why investing time really matters when you're trying to what we would call problem or opportunity frame from a design perspective.
Thank you so much. Any questions, any thoughts? Thank you for your patience with us because our slides were not our actual slides. So.
We do have a recommendation slides that is in the new deck. I just thought about that. So before we leave, we'll read those at you so you get those.
Any questions or, yeah. That's okay.
You didn't write it down. We'll repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really love ending on this. One study that I think is really powerful is like farmers in India, when they sell their crop, have on average, I think it was like 15 percentile higher IQ than at the end of their season before they sell. Mm-hmm. So your financial scarcity is so impactful. And this is actually why I'm here as a coach, to learn about what people are doing. What programs and investors have you seen do the best job of supporting social enterprise leaders and nonprofit leaders who are usually marginalized in some way in regulating themselves and supporting them through trauma-related challenges? If any. Otherwise, we can work together.
So we actually have seen a significant increase of accelerator programs and incubators reach out to us for us to train their staff, because they are becoming more aware of wanting to have a trauma sensitive or trauma aware lens to the way they interact and work with entrepreneurs. So I feel like it's such a new space that it's hard for me to just list out who it would be, but it's shifting where it's now becoming an important aspect to consider when working with entrepreneurs. Yeah. And I love that study. Yeah, that's a good study.
I've seen like talent and development programs that do a really good job of wrapping themselves around leaders, right? Because I think at the core, beyond entrepreneurs we have it tough. Like I'm just gonna name that for us. But what I mean by that is like nobody tells you that what your business does for a consumer is only half the job. So then you step into it and you're like, well, what's all this other stuff? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I gotta operate. Right. And now you're effectively running two businesses. Nobody approaches us in that full conversation, I think. Well, let me rephrase that. I found that access is a real thing. And we don't always like to talk about differentiated access to who gets what. And we were talking about this coming over here, right? So I'm going to say something that's going to sound really crass. I grew up really, really poor. I'm gay. But I'm also a cisgendered man, and I'm 6'2". I'm black. A huge chunk of my family's not from America. They're from an American territory, St. Croix. So there's a lot of complexity in my family, a lot of complexity in life, and trauma I'm working through, and chronic stressors I'm working through. But like, if I got pulled over by the police in Philly, I got numbers I can call. I know the police chief. So there's this dynamic of power that you have to make sense of in all those complexities. And so access is not handed out equally. So some entrepreneurs do get those conversations. A ton do not. We don't look at that as like equity, of just like equity of information. When's the last time someone did an information access audit? and said, how equitably are we getting the deepest secrets about entrepreneurship to all the folks? No, that's not really a thing, right? So I offer that as like the places I see that work tend to be talent development that's honest about how talent development within upward mobility rather within an organization really works, and then tailor designs and tailors interventions to that and to those folks, right? Whether it's women of color, BIPOC, whatever, they're intentional. 2 questions came in. Or is something you want to add?
No.
The first question is, how do you quantify the potential impact of reducing trauma in an individual or society? I love that question. Do you want to take a first stab? Or you want me to go ahead?
Yeah.
All right, so it's in our recommendations, actually, right? I think really what you have to understand is, what is the trauma? What are the traumas? Because the thing is, it's a perceived or literal threat, which means what? If I'm not in a relationship with you, I can't understand what you perceive to be a threat. Why would you just voluntarily tell me that information? So this is the part where like problem framing is from a designer's perspective, is a great opportunity to do what we call discovery research. You build and you learn with people over time about the complexities of their experiences. How do they qualify very normative activities? How do they, what is it like walking to school, right? I'm just picking a random thing. If you're doing something about place, asking about people's experiences as they're going to and from very, again, kind of compulsory regular places, and from what you learn, following to the next iterative question of really humble curiosity and being in relationship with them with an investment of time that allows you then to extrapolate from all of that qualitative data some real measures that start to point at larger proxies. You can start getting into working with larger data sets if you know how to build yourself there. And I think there's a lot, I'll end here, I think there's a lot to learn from clinical trials in the public health and pharmaceutical world. If you're trying to drive down diabetes or heart disease and the medications in clinical trial, you know in 2 years you're not gonna get, oh yeah, this medicine reduced heart disease by 50% with these groups of people. You're looking for the right indicators that say, if this thing over here keeps going down at this rate, we know that by year 7, we'll get to this goal that we have, right? And so that, I think it's that kind of complexity of thinking for proxies and systems and real indicators, tangible, quantifiable, that need to be organized, but you gotta do them with the people that live the trauma. Mm-hmm. Oh, do you want anything to add?
No.
Okay, cool. You want to take
good.
the next question? Thank you.
I just want to make sure everyone's questions get answered.
Yeah.
When an org has trauma but needs to start uncovering and talking about it, how do they start? Oh, that's a big, big question to answer. Well, I mean, I think the place to start with any of this is to identify and name it, and then create supports to be able to work through it. I think that it's hard to answer this because I don't know the specific details about it. But there are a lot of resources around restorative justice and repair that you can bring in from the outside to support your organization in moving through maybe some traumatic policies that they may have or some experiences that occurred in the workplace. Do you want to add to that?
Sure. Is there another question? I could add to it, but if there's another question,
Yeah.
I don't want to take away from that. I'll add this while we're looking and seeing. I think the other thing to consider about talking about trauma, it's kind of, I'll go back to a workplace example. As you can tell, my business deals a lot with workplaces and organizational culture. So my favorite is like, oh, we got an open door policy. My door is always open. Does anybody walk through the door? No.
No.
Okay. Have you ever asked any questions about why? No. Right? Like, and people are honest, right? They're not like making it up. It was like, oh my God, I never thought about that. I'm like, that's a great place to practice some curiosity. And so then by default, the question is, do you have the psychological and social muscles to sit in the reality of the answers you're getting back? And if not, that's a great place for talent development that a lot of people don't consider talent development, but we push it right into that category. A good manager has to be able to take constructive feedback, period.
Yeah.
because what you're signaling to people is not only do they matter, but that there is an element of essentially a co-design here. So I do want to hear your opinions. I am signaling to you subconsciously and consciously that your voice matters. There's a lane here, so that when the time comes for you to use it, when we need it, because something's going on that's hitting the bottom line and we're not getting any real answers from you, the lane is already there. You don't have to construct the highway. You've already done it over time, right? So I think there's a lot of maintenance things that people need to be doing or need to implement to be able to address talking about and uncovering what's there, because it can be dangerous to uncover things if that kind of stuff is not present. It would make you pariah number one and a target. It can, rather, I should say.
Any final questions? Yeah. Yeah, so we, in the Trauma of Money, we have a 6-step method that we use for healing financial trauma and disempowering financial shame. And step 1, we talk about naming it. There's a very common phrase in the trauma world, we name it to tame it. So naming what's happening with radical honesty, and then supporting the nervous system. That's step 1. And we do this we do this continuously with repetition, because so much of the activations that we have around money are so deeply programmed, and we have like very deeply ingrained neural pathways that will cause the response for us to have. So in order to shift and heal, we reprogram through repetition. So noticing like if shame is arising or if the response is arising, naming it, and then what does the nervous system need to bring you back into a place of regulation? And doing that over and over again. That's step 1. Step 2, we call it the vision phase. So once we're feeling more regulated, we tap into the vision. What are the values that we hold? What's our vision we have for our lives? Once we're rooted in that place, that's kind of moving us out of the narrow, tunneled vision of trauma or scarcity, and it's bringing us into more of an expansive place. Then we go into the inventory phase. And this is where we identify what's really present, what's really happening outside of that trauma response, and what do we need to support our next right action, essentially. And so those are the steps that we use in Trauma of Money. And we call our framework, it's a non-prescriptive framework, because we're not saying like, you have to heal by seeing a therapist, or you have to heal in this specific way. There's multiple ways of being with money. There's multiple ways of healing. But we find that loose framework of naming it, what does the nervous system need? Who am I? What are my values and my vision? And then what's really present and what do I need to shift over and over again is what we've found to be really impactful in healing financial trauma.
I'll just build on that from a systems perspective, because like the individual has to do a lot of that work, right? And then, thank you. And then when you are on that journey, but now you have to deal with the systems and what we've created, inherited, et cetera. Our value prop, like if you actually, can you go back to the trauma slide, please? Just want that. Yeah, there we go. So literally a cheat is, what's the inverse of helplessness, terror, and a lack of control? It's actually things like power sharing. That's why frameworks like co-design are so important. All like healing is not linear, the same way that grief is not exactly linear. But it's got major tenets and you gotta address them. The first major thing that has to be addressed for a person, which gets into what Chantel was just talking about, is a sense of agency or power. Period. And so from a systems perspective, how are we enabling key players and actors that need to feel empowered to actually practice, be able to practice that power? And sharing power actually doesn't always mean giving up power. I do want to challenge that narrative that's out there. That's actually not a truth. Mm-hmm. That's a thing we've come to colloquially believe. It's a human-made idea that literally, if you share power, you give up power. Sharing power is actually afforded people power and kept them safe in many ways. And I could point to a number of examples over history, right? Arguably the best one for us was going from being hunter-gatherers to being sedentary and, mastering farming the way that we did, right? Food forests and the whole nine, right? So all that being said, there's that side of the systems piece of the right. There are we do it all the time. You betting on the horse or the jockey, right? Like there are key people and things that we invest in. And what is the system of environment or the systems and the environmental conditions that we are putting these people in regularly? And is it actually aimed to produce their best or to trigger them to potentially behave in ways that actually undermine our capital? Are there systems triggers that actually I'll end it here. Education, public education, arguably at this point in many places across the country, rural and metropolitan, might actually be best described as public dollars aiding the poisoning of the central nervous system because of everything that I just told you about between the relationship of chronic stress and traumatic experiences. This is why the Surgeon General is pushing on stress so hard. We have so much data. None of it's making its way to an applied experience of our humanity, and then all the ways systems have cut up that humanity by race, by gender, by class, by fill in the blank. So when you're organizing your social impact dollars, I don't understand how we don't do a lot of good discovery research, co-designing with people to get to what I talked about earlier, which is getting to the right proxies, the right identifiers or indicators to really get towards chipping away the big thing for healing. Yeah. And I will officially shut up with that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so much of the work we do in Trauma of Money is spending time asking, like, whose shame is this? Whose response is this? And unpacking where it came from and just letting people know your response is a very natural response to a very sick environment. And that in itself leads to that sense of agency that Mike is talking about, and moving away from putting the burden of responsibility on the individual and actually placing it where it belongs.